Day, how is the data looking? What is it? Not only how is the data looking? How do you start a show like that? What is the data saying, and how can that data help our customers achieve their goals and stay ahead of the competition? For all those people that don't really look at data and say, "Hey, data isn't the new oil," when it really is. That's right. Welcome to the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly. I threw myself off there, boys. I threw myself off on the intro, man. DJ gave me such props on my intro yesterday, and it's kind of like you ever seen a comedian and the MC does really, really, really well, and then it's like, dude, that's gonna be a tough act to follow. It's one of those feelings that I had. It's crazy. Data Day Wednesday. I'm so excited for Wednesdays, Dean. I have to say thank you again for being here because
great.
You said a few things last week, and part of what you said last week I've been thinking about for a couple of days. And for some of you, it sounds really crazy. Like, why is he thinking about freight rates and data for days? But my whole philosophy is, DJ and I started this show to help salespeople stay ahead of the change curve, to give them new strategies and ideas. And the last few weeks we've talked. If all of you have not listened, go back through the podcast directory and just play Wednesday after Wednesday after Wednesday. Yes. There's a theme happening, right? Beginning of January, Dean had said, like, guys, listen, rates year over year are higher. Then they went up to this. Then they went up to this. And so, Dean, I really, starting next week, I'm gonna send a bunch of questions to you kind of the day before, because I think I'm kind of putting you on the spot. But can you tell us what areas, like, again, we talked last week where we said it's not North America, like it's geographical regions that are spiking and that have been spiking for 2 or 3 weeks, that continue to spike and rise. My question is going to be, what are those areas? And for all of you watching and listening who have customers in those areas, like, you got to get on the phone with them and tell them what's going on. You got to share with them this episode. You got to like give them the data they need to put you as the Yoda, make them the Luke Skywalker in their company. You are the Yoda. You're the one that gives the information that you take from this show. So, some people had said, Data Day Wednesday, it's awesome, but is there something other than like ports that we can talk about? I said, for sure. I said, if you analyze the information we've had just on the last 4 shows, you have a mountain of
the
gold.
Landscape of everything. The ports are the big topic right now.
I mean, you don't have to go anywhere. You just go PORT in Google, and the first 15 things are all the issues with the ports. Like, we all know there's issues, but for the majority of the people watching and listening, the OTR, the capacity, these other issues are coming to light. And for me, it's like, how does that information translate into us being able to help our customers achieve their goals?
Exactly.
Yep. Yeah. So ports is most sort of synonymous with water, ocean, but there are other ports to think about. There are land ports, import, ports, airports. A couple of things that there's a lot of seasonality that happens this time of the year. So Yuma, Arizona is a market I'd watch if I was a reefer carrier. It's 90% of our leafy greens come from that area down on the border. We spoke a few weeks ago, lettuce plants literally move their entire facility, 65 flatbed loads, move the whole facility for 3 months to make leafy greens down there. So you'll see spot rates. They'll push out about 450 truckloads a day into the spot market out of Yuma, Arizona, and that's it's not a long deadhead out of Phoenix or San Diego, but there's some really good rates coming out of there because it's where all of our lettuce and cabbage and things like that are coming from. Go across on the same latitude, a few degrees off, you've got strawberries coming online and blueberries. You've got the US domestic produce season starting now. You might say, but it's still winter, but it's cold in Florida. But the strawberry festival in Lakeland will be late February. That's the peak of the strawberry season. So reefer carriers do pretty well out of that market down there. If you go to, we talked about our port markets last week. Miami's going to be huge this week and next week because it's Valentine's Day coming up. You might say, well, what's that got to do with anything? Well, deep into Florida is a place you've got to be very careful in terms of how much you charge to go in there because of the probability of a longer deadhead back out north. You've got, I just looked at the data yesterday of all of the roses and carnations we'll use or we'll give on Valentine's Day, 70% come from Ecuador and Colombia, and the vast majority will land in Miami. There will be 30 to 40 747 jumbos bringing in plane load after plane load of flowers. That freight's got to move really, really fast. So again, that's a market.
That is super interesting.
Yep.
When people think Valentine's Day, immediately I think chocolate. I automatically thought, oh wow, is that like the majority of chocolate? But it's actually flowers.
Well,
makes sense.
Chocolates, flowers, chocolates, gift cards, other gifts have already been positioned in warehouses already. Right. But the real time sensitive capacity crunch rate volatility is going to come through the flowers through Miami, and it's going to be compressed into the next 10 days. Like this is peak shipping week this week. Right. Now, the other area that's popped up, you guys
that's gold right there.
You guys have got some protests going on up in your part of the country, and what it's done, we talked about it last week. There's fewer trucks coming into the US. I had a look at Auto Alley this week. You'll know what Auto Alley is. Auto Alley is where all of the auto parts move back and forward between Canada and US and Mexico. I read a data point the other day, which is interesting. 65 Canadian auto parts manufacturers have 120 manufacturing plants in Mexico. It's 2 to 1.
Interesting.
So wiring harnesses, steering wheels, they'll make some of it in Canada, truck it all the way to Mexico. It'll be added, another bit will be added to it, and then it'll come all the way back. Yep. So on that particular lane, it's fascinating. Rates are up substantially out of that particular area. And I'll just find the data point, because if you remember, if you're loading, most of the volume coming out of Canada is on Canadian carriers, and they've got to have a load back across the border. So they don't leave Canada without a load on a dock waiting to go back. So if you've got fewer trucks southbound, you've got less capacity northbound for things like auto parts. And on that particular lane last week, rates were up. I'm just trying to find the data point. Well, I'll quickly talk about the other. Elizabeth to Toronto, up 86 cents a mile in the last week.
Wow. Elizabeth, New Jersey?
Yeah, to Toronto. So that's a pretty high rate volatility right now in some of those markets.
And that's already running, like Jersey already runs at close to $4 a mile because it's a short haul.
Yeah. So we're going to see pretty steep rate volatility until this sort of irons itself out of the market. Let me quickly, the other market that was pretty hot yesterday was FAR, Texas. Now FAR is in what we call the Mcallen freight market, and it's where a lot of volume comes in through Laredo and that market also. So this is a fascinating data point, DJ. The average spot rate from Mcallen to Toronto. So remember, this is kind of that auto parts, what we call Auto Alley, where a lot of auto parts move across border. Average, I'm looking at the line haul rates. This is excluding fuel. Average probably $1.60 a mile for all of last year. Currently sitting at $2.53.
Wow!
Right, so it's up. It's up almost $1 a mile in the last 7 days. So there's stuff going on in markets. So if you said what's going to be hot, well, they're not high volume lanes, but there's a lot of volatility in any of these markets that depend on northbound capacity back into Canada. Phoenix, British Columbia, Phoenix, Toronto, Quebec, Montreal, anything out of the East Coast. I know a lot of guys that haul produce out of Quebec, flatbed lumber out of Quebec, Nova Scotia, lobsters out of Nova Scotia in particular. They run down into New England. They rely on dedicated loadings back. So if you've got fewer guys traveling, even if they're going to sit it out for a week, you've got less capacity northbound, and that's what we're seeing. So again, brokers, talking to shippers, customers, capacity is going to be tight on any of those lanes northbound.
Interesting. Good morning, Jeff.
Morning, Jeff.
Ryan asks a question. Ryan says, how do you compare Valentine's Day to Mother's Day in terms of volume?
Not in the same ballpark.
Not in the same ballpark.
Peak shipping season out of South America from Ecuador and Colombia is May, by far, by a factor of about 5x. So the volumes on Valentine's Day are interesting, but come May, and remember, it's an even bigger deal for reefer carriers in Florida because it's also produce season's well underway. You've already got Vidalia onions coming online. You've got Georgia peachers. You've got all sorts of stuff coming online around the same time.
Then you throw Mother's Day into the mix.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you've got a lot of summer produce coming out of Florida. Period, and rates start to escalate from there on. So May's a tough time for capacity deep in Florida, but again, Miami will be the focus around Mother's Day.
Okay. And then we've got Stephanie. Good morning. I'm very. It's a very hard time covering Texas to Canada. You see this being an ongoing issue?
No. I think it'll. So two things could happen, right? You've got less drivers coming across, so that's affected capacity. I think that'll even itself out pretty quickly once people get back to work and get whatever it is in their system out of their system. So I think it'll even itself out in the long run, simply because you've got like 80% of your drivers vaccinated. We're about 55 here in the US. There's enough drivers to cross border with freight, right? There's enough drivers right now. I think it's a temporary blip. I think it's a temporary imbalance, and you'll be able to cover those loads as soon as these protests start to dissipate. I don't know when that's going to happen, but so two things could happen here, right? If you've got less drivers who won't or can't cross the border because they're not vaccinated, you're going to have more capacity in Canada, and rates will go down. And here, less capacity to run north because you've got to be qualified, vaccinated, have all the right credentials to cross border. You'll have less capacity. So that's the worst case scenario, is you have, a capacity balance and it's kind of permanent. I don't think that's the case though. Most of the freight that runs cross border is dedicated. It's contract. And it's not
and that
spot.
was going to be one of my questions to you, Dean, because when I ran a lot of auto parts, I dealt with Magna and a couple of the big auto parts suppliers. Everything was dedicated. And it would be an interesting data point to get, because I remember when ELD was coming into effect, I spoke to many Magna plants, and I'm like, listen, when ELD hits, rates are going to go up. And they're like, we're Magna, rates aren't going up. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. Rates are going up. It's all dedicated. And so for Auto Alley, for there to be more freight hitting the spot market in Auto Alley, and correct me if I'm wrong, but immediately tells me that means less carriers are dedicating to it, because you know what? Why am I going to take $1.10 a mile when I can get $3 a mile in the spot market? Even though it's like, so, you look at the 2018-19, right? In 2018, any carrier that made that decision and maybe got rid of long-term contracts for the hot spot market for the next 5 years got like their head chopped off 11 months later when things plummeted off the end of a cliff. But now we're close to 2 years in with rates consistently rising. Now, there's an argument to be said, are they where they should have been years ago? That's an argument that I think is its own show and it's by itself, because I do believe prior to 2018, prior to ELD, I think rates were in the toilet for asset-based carriers. I mean, as a broker, you guys have all the risk. You have all the rolling steel. You invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in one driver behind a wheel. You have all the insurance risk. I sit back, I move a piece of paper, I make profit. But and any broker that doesn't fully grasp that, I think, really needs to check themselves in a mirror, because that's really what we do. But you see the Auto Alley rates going up 80 something cents a mile, going up like $1 a mile, like you just said. To me, that says, okay, there's more carriers saying, hey, whoa. If you don't want to pay me this rate, that's fine. I'll go find freight somewhere else. Now it's going to the spot market, and they're probably paying more than if they dedicated it with just little higher rates to their carrier base. Because I know there's all these milk runs and, 6-7 picks to create a truckload. And you got to, with auto parts, I found that you got to kind of have 3 or 4 of the companies in order to make the lanes profitable. What do you see happening in that side of it? Is that what you're seeing, or what the data is telling you?
Well, so I just looked at the contract rates, right? So on that lane, the average contract rate, including fuel. So if I include fuel in this, it's $2.31 on contract, $2.96 on spot. So contract is pretty flat at about average at $2.25 a mile since last July. That's including fuel, right? So that's shipper to carrier contract rates. So that's what the majority of freight will move on. But so if it's 231 including fuel, broker to carrier spot including fuel is 296 today. So that tells you that there is a capacity imbalance and that some of the big contract carriers haven't been able to cover all of those loads. You would probably see first tender acceptance rates a little bit higher, and some of those loads will slip down through the routing guide and into the spot market. So I think there's definitely. So I think the point here, Dan, is that it hasn't taken much to disrupt this freight market in the last 18 months. Right? It doesn't take much at all.
Not at all.
Polar vortex last year, ELD mandate going back. We've just had 3 weeks of back-to-back weather, and now we've got a 1 in 100-year storm about to hit the Ohio Valley. And so we're talking icing this morning in Memphis. If that I-40 shuts down and you start to shut down the 70, 80, 90, 55, 81, this could be, again, it may not be polar vortex level disruption, but it'll be the third, maybe the fourth week in a row of disruption to the velocity of trucks through freight markets, the flow.
And then ELDs, you've got all the other aspects hitting at the same time. So we got a couple of things here, and I'd like to actually also just touch back with Stephanie's question, because I think it's a good one.
I agree.
Ryan says, yes, Quebec outbound this week is an absolute mess. Jeff says, I see the port of the Port of Oakland will get help with backlog of empty containers. A little good news. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've seen that too.
What are your thoughts on that, Dean? That the Port of Oakland is getting a little help with backlog of empty containers.
Yeah, there's been a lot of shipping lines picking up each other's containers, what they call sweeper ships. The sweepers will come in and just pick up a whole bunch of empties, even not just their own empties, but anyone's empties. So that's great news. I think that there's lots of capacity running back to Asia from the West Coast. It's like right now, the average of, if you look at the ratio of inbound loaded to outbound loaded, on the West Coast, it's about 3 to 1 for the whole West Coast. Los Angeles, it's 4.66 to 1. So it's almost like for every 5 coming in, right? Only one's going out loaded. So there's a lot more empties going out of the West Coast than the East Coast. So that's going to solve some of those problems. But then you've got all of the COVID disruptions on all of the ports back in Asia. So it's not like this is an easy fix. I think it's a bit more nuanced, Jeff, that it's a good start, but I don't know that it's going to ease things off. You've got Lunar New Year this week. So there'll be a downturn in production. But you also got a lot of ports closed and having sort of COVID infection rates spiking.
So there's another one. Jeff's asking about the truckers' vaccine mandate convoy set to hit California to Florida. What are your thoughts on that, Dean?
That's a double face plant. This is utter madness.
Double face clam.
This is like a head scratcher. Like this is terrible. Like there's a way to advocate for change. This is not how you do it. I said the same about the guys north of the border. This is not how you protest. It got hijacked quickly into something that it's not. This is not how you go about change. And they did the same thing in May of 2020, protested in Washington about low freight rates. Since then, it's been crickets, right? So since then, freight rates have more than doubled. And where's the transparency discussion now? Because I'm sure on the broking side and the shipper side, they'll be asking, well, how about transparency, guys? You wanted transparency, when rates were low. You can't have it both ways.
And here's the thing is, you look at how that all played out, right?
Yep.
And listen, I believe in full transparency. I believe cost plus is the way to go. And I think cost plus from an asset side to customers is the way to go. And a cost plus from a broker side is the way to go.
Agreed.
But you're right. It's interesting how when things flip, I've talked to some people and they're like, oh, it's because of the protests in DC that all the rates have changed. I said, nah, I don't agree with that. Like, you got to understand there's many more pieces of the puzzle that have made this.
There's a lot to this web.
and you know what? I love the fact that, so a few things, and again, my opinion, crucify me if you want, don't care. The reality is what I see is this. Like, we had the thanks truckers, frontline. It dissipated very quick. Now everybody's back to thanking truckers. I think it's going to dissipate again. And unfortunately, it's just
We said, Dan, last week on the show, they'll go from heroes to villains in a heartbeat. And it's going to turn. This is like, why would you leave shipper? Why would you abandon your shippers now? Like if you're going to protest and go off the road for a week and leave your shippers' freight stranded, shippers are going to have pretty good memories when it comes to this. And I think that's part of the story of the double-digit rate increases shippers have seen for 6 quarters has come with a much higher commitment to move freight. Like if you want the rates, then you've got to move our freight. So this will be. I don't know that this will affect the contract market a lot. I just don't. I think this is a non-event. I think this will be hijacked into another protest about things that have got very little to do with trucking. I just
think in the end it's going to morph into something completely different.
It will. I picked up on it quickly last week. There was clearly some dark money behind a lot of these efforts. You just can't raise that much money that quickly without something going on. Trucking's not a high margin business. It's a tough business to make money. Carriers have had a pretty profitable year. I just don't see this being realistic. This is the last. This is completely not the time to be protesting and off the road. Because this market will turn, right? Rates will drop, and then the margins will drop. So that's what carriers. I've been saying for a year: make money while the hay's shining. Like make hay while the sun's shining. Bank that money. Make as much as you can. Drive as many miles as you can. Do it safely because you need to have that money put away for the rainy day. Because when demand changes, there's going to be a lot of capacity out there. Right? There is no driver shortage. I can tell you that right now. No. There's a throughput issue, like trucks have slowed down through the whole freight network, as we talked about, but there'll be plenty of trucks when the market turns.
Well, if we just take, and again, I know I keep going back to 2018, 19, but it's a great view of what happened. Shippers were like caught so off guard because very few people talked about how ELD was going to impact rates. I remember at one point it was 5-1 in Texas when I was trying to move freight out of Texas. There was one truck for 5 loads. And the guy literally said, "What's your rate? What are you offering?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "What are you offering?" Like, I've got 5 people that want my truck. The highest price is going to get it. And this drove rates like through the roof. But you know what? I remember a very short period of time later, a friend of mine that does a lot of Toronto, Montreal, he's like, we were getting, $1,050, $1,100, like literally 3.5, 4 weeks ago. I got offered $350 today. $350 for 346 miles. He goes, Dan, it's less than $1 a mile, fuel in. And he goes, but you know what the problem is? Somebody's going to take it. And I know we talked about this a couple of shows ago, but that's what literally is going to happen when all of this sorts itself out. Now, will it be at $350? Maybe not. Maybe it'll be at $600 or $700, but it won't be at $1,200.
Exactly.
And in my opinion, Dean, you're absolutely right. Shippers remember. And it's,
I remember the constant battle we keep seeing in this. That's the change of the market constantly is who's winning.
I remember my customers going, you just wait.
In the end, it's like the stock market. Is it a bear market or is it a
bull market? Yeah,
bull market. That's it.
I just did some numbers on 1.7.
Yeah, Michael says, love to hear what Dean thinks about various digital marketplaces on the load data and capacity data duplicated across spot markets. Oh, okay. So what do you think about the various digital marketplaces and the load data capacity duplicated across the spot markets? So that sounds to me like a little bit of artificial inflation in the spot market.
Yeah, there is. There is a tendency of some people in the broking community to post the same load multiple times. We scrub, we tune all of that out when it comes to our load board activity. So we've got some pretty good algorithms that take all that into account. But yes, there is. You could see the same load on multiple load boards. I think the thing you've got to watch from a carrier or broker's perspective is the density of the data. How deep is the data? How representative of that lane is that data? Our data, our data is not based on load board rates, and this is a big distinction. DAT's data is based on loads moved, based on rates accepted by carriers. Right, so that's a big distinction because you could post a load on a load board with a ridiculous rate. At the end of the day, someone's going to move that load at a given rate and accept that load and deliver the freight. That's what's in our rate view products. I think understand where the data is coming from. Is it dense? Is it does it represent the market our data represents about a third of the truckload market, so it's a reasonable data set in terms of representation. But yeah, I think you've got to weigh information on your own scales, right? So you've got to say, what's this? Sometimes if you see what's that saying? If something looks too good to be true,
it usually is.
So you see some data points out there that are a little bit unusual. You've got to be pretty good at weeding out the outliers. But that said, I also think that transparency is a great thing. So we've had a lot more transparency come into the industry for shippers, brokers, and carriers since the ELD mandate. But it still comes down to supply and demand at the end of the day, right? It doesn't matter.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, I often lately been referring to the freight market as just like the housing market. You have people, well, my house is worth this. No, your house is worth what somebody's willing to pay for it.
Right.
And it's what it is. So, we have houses in our neighborhood going for $175,000, $200,000 above asking.
Right.
And personally, I look at it and I say, it ain't worth it. But if I wanted to buy that house, that would be what I'd have to pay. And that to me is kind of representative of our freight market now, especially if you start talking, you're coming out of Arizona and 2 weeks ago it was fine. And now all of a sudden it's like, what do you mean my rate's almost doubled? I have students where they have like a load every 2-3 weeks out of California. And like rates are there's no flat line for any customer in California with a little volume like that, where it's like, 1 month it's 6, the next month it's 10 grand, the next month, because you're pretty much paying daily market rates based on everything going on in that market. And it goes back to Stephanie's question, where she's saying like it is very hard covering Texas to Canada. A couple of things that my question begins when Stephanie says very hard. I mean, obviously we don't understand the numbers that she has. Maybe she's got a limited number, which makes it hard. But also there's a capacity issue that makes it hard. So now you've got those two, and just like a house, supply and demand. There's one house on the street and there's 15 people that want the house. There's going to be a bidding war.
It's going up.
It's going up. And, to the point where in our area anyways, in Canada, there was banks that said, no, hold on. We approved you for a mortgage for this, but this house ain't worth that. You need to fork up an extra 50, 60K. And like people were defaulting on the agreements. Right. So like, I guess let's go back to Stephanie here for a minute, because I really want to make sure we give some serious value to people. What are some of the conversations Stephanie can have based on the data, Dean? So like, a couple of weeks ago to this week to next week, what are you seeing in that area to help her go back to her customers and say, hey, listen, this is what the reality of the next couple of weeks is. We need to put a plan in place.
Definitely.
Watch the weather forecast. Okay. Because we're in the grip of, climate change is clearly, having an impact, and what we're seeing is more severity in the storms. So we're seeing much more. So right now you've got a storm that's stretching from deep in Texas all the way to Boston, and it's going to be it's a multi-day event. And we've got ice, we've got cold weather, we've got frost, freezing produce. I think what my point for Stephanie is that we'll see a lot of rate volatility and capacity issues regionally, right, based on the weather impact in the next couple of months, right? So that's going to be a big issue, and that's going to affect the flow of trucks. And then you've got to watch, weather's another one that brings on the produce season again. So back to, deep in Florida, look at your big events around capacity. So Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, produce season. So you're going to see the Southeast come online with produce season in April. Capacity, refrigerator capacity is going to be incredibly tight starting then. That's why reefer rates spike in June. So I think West Coast will always have opportunity because of the import volumes that are coming in there. Lots of truckload volume in Seattle because the rail lines are, they've had a surge of imports and they've had some flooding issues they're struggling to catch up with.
Okay.
So I think, we're close on time here.
Interesting.
Adam says, thanks for the guys. I was wondering what was going on. Interesting topic. So Stephanie's just thrown a couple of things into the mix here that we were unaware of. So Stephanie says 2 loads van for hazmat. They're going to Hamilton and Regina. Now, I could tell you, Stephanie,
looking for a week.
Your better bet will be bringing everything to the GTA, the Hamilton, Toronto area, and cross-docking it to go to Regina, then finding Texas to Regina. Texas West Coast has synonymously for decades now been very difficult. Very few people do it. And the ones that do it typically don't do hazmat. I mean, we've seen, Dean, do you have any stats? Because I've seen somewhere in the neighborhood, if I'm going to say in the last probably 5 years, 60% of the people I always used to call for hazmat no longer do hazmat because carriers are trying to move way away from it.
I see they do.
Yeah. So part of your, I'm going to say without even knowing who you've called, Stephanie, part of the issue is hazmat because now you're adding another variable to the mix that's outside of everything else.
Yeah, you're kind of picking a niche, and so it's gonna be
And my suggestion would be you focus on getting both of them to Toronto. There's a lot of great companies in Toronto that do hazmat cross dock. Like York Warehousing, stuff like that. They do. Actually, I'm not sure if Mike still does hazmat cross dock, but there's a bunch of companies out here that do hazmat cross dock, and you're going to have way better capacity going like hazmat Toronto to Regina. I believe Highlight still does hazmat, which would be a good one. Call Kirk and the boys at Highlight to see if they can get you to Regina. But you're going to have much better ability if you can just get it to even Quebec. If you find some Quebec carriers from Texas to Quebec, and I know it's going to be an extra cost, but you're going to be able to serve the customer. You're going to be able to get the freight.
At least you can get it moved. I mean, you said
what were you saying? Somewhere I saw like 2 weeks or something. Oh, no reefers allowed. More fun with this one. Jeez, you just added the trifecta of booking ability there. That is crazy.
Guys, try to find this needle in a haystack.
Spot rates on that lane are up 71 cents a mile in the last week, so they're up to 288, as high as 354 for some loads. So
does that take into account hazmat?
No, not just the dry van. But Dan, what about the option of getting capacity to say Buffalo or Detroit, and then transloading, cross-docking?
And transloading there, you can definitely look at that. The reason I say Ontario is Ryan says find a new customer. Steph says I got screwed. Laugh out loud. Jeff has a contact. Reach
customer
out to
profile.
Jeff.
Customer profile
That can help Stephanie. I have a contact up there that can help her. So Stephanie, reach out to Jeff.
Reach out to Jeff.
So it's part of the Buffalo thing, Dean, would just be the paperwork for the border. For us, when you're coming inbound, right? A lot of customers want to put the PARS stickers and all that on the paperwork. They want a copy of PARS. So, I mean, listen, I've done it a lot with pharmaceuticals where I found carriers to go to Buffalo and I redid the paperwork. I remanifested it, explained to the shipper, but it's some shippers are like, no, I want the PARS number because they can track it. They can make sure it's cleared when they pay their customs duties. So it was, for me, it was always what is the Canadian location that I can find to do the cross dock? Like to the point where when we would move electronics and we would not have any luck from, the Microsofts in Memphis or the Dell computers in Austin, Texas and stuff like that, or Nashville, we would say, okay, can we bring it to Toronto? Can we cross dock it? We'll film the entire cross because it's quality control and it's security, right? We'll film the entire cross dock. It's just like Texas is just one of those states where it's typically beef that's moving, right? Either to or from. Like H&R up and out west, they do a lot of stuff down into Texas, but again, they're on reefers, so it's this state that's I've always found anyways, if anyone knows of anyone, please reach out and just post it in the comments because we'll help Stephanie out here. But it's synonymous with real big issues, getting that West Coast connection. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Interesting. Very good.
This is great.
So reach out to Crossdock Systems in Mississauga. The boys at Crossdock, Drew, great guy. Reach out to Drew. They're good people over there. And I'm not sure if Crossdock does hazmat, but reach out to them. All right. Anything else we got to share today, boys?
I had a question of the week. Is it data, or data?
Ooh.
So I call it data.
Yeah.
But then I also call it taco instead of taco. It's
Australians will say
data. It's
data.
taco. That's what it is. Data. It's data. It's data. Yeah. And then it's a tomato. It's ketchup or ketchup. It's caramel or caramel.
I can't say data. I can say data.
Data.
I've weaned myself off the Australian data. Like it's got 50 syllables in it. Data is just a stretch. I can't get there in my head.
It is. I know. It's. I use a lot of programs when I type, like because I'm a typo king, and like some of the things I'm like, really? That's interesting. That spelling, and like, okay, that's like one thing, like neighbor. I have such a difficult time getting the spelling right for neighbor. And I'm like, why isn't it just this? Like, it sounds better like this. And it's always coming up wrong. There's a couple of words that I tend to
have that problem with my new voice activated remote for the TV, right? It's like when you put in a particular movie name, it'll come up with something really, really weird. The most embarrassing.
And your wife's like, what have you been watching?
What did you just look up?
What was that? Blame it on the accent. Gets me out of trouble all the time.
That's hilarious.
Well, thank you, Dean.
All right,
Dean, you are the man, brother. You are the man.
We'll see you next Wednesday.
We'll see you next Wednesday. DJ, you got a quote to lead us?
I got one. Again, thank you, Dean. Guys, this was great. Stephanie, thank you. Hopefully we helped you out. Thanks for watching. Anybody else? I mean, use us. When Dean's here, you see he's the mad scientist with this stuff. So you want some tips and some tricks and some help to help your customers out, kind of predict the future as much as we can. These are the days. So, if you missed it, like us and subscribe down below. You can follow us on all the channels. Again, Dean, thank you so much. I figured this fits perfect. Thomas Redman, quote from Thomas Redman: "Where there is data smoke, there is business fire." So,
that's a good one.
I like that.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.